Good evening to all the distinguished speakers, guests, and friends who are now in the Western Hemisphere, and good morning, 早上好，各位在中国地区的朋友们。We're very much pleased to have you all here at Columbia Global Center's Beijing virtual platform to join this international forum on holistic education. Among hundreds of audience with us now on Zoom and the local live streaming platform, roughly 50% are teachers, administrator working in schools, with another half of college students, graduate students, scholars, parents, and others. I just want to let you know that your enthusiasm on this Saturday morning or your Friday evening gives us every reason to expect a fruitful discussion and exchange of ideas. We encourage you to post your comments and questions in the chat box or use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen during the presentation. I mean, you don't need to wait until the end of every talk or the whole event to ask a question. So that will give the speaker enough time to review before they go offline, or the host can ask the speakers on your behalf in a timely manner. So this program now you see on the screen is presented by the Center on Chinese Education at Columbia University Teachers College, Columbia Global Centers Beijing, and the Peking University Education Foundation North America. The forum will feature the world-renowned scholars, including Professor John Miller, author of Holistic Curriculum, as well as educational specialists from UNICEF Headquarters in New York, Beijing Normal University, the National Institute of Education Science China, and principals from selective schools. I believe you all know and agree now more than ever, educators and education administrators are looking for new ways to effectively teach students. From teachers, principals, parents, to decision maker in the government, debates are ongoing about how to best train up the next generation. While new and innovative way, of delivering instruction have been imagined, and new philosophy of that education being developed, we believe it's critical and meaningful to review this classical educational concept that developed and have thrived for almost half a century. So through this forum, we hope to expound on the latest research and practice in the field of holistic education, explore valuable experiences of teaching the whole student, which stands in stark contrast to policies focused on testing to detriment of student development, and also to cultivate an ecological environment to encourage the long-term development of this holistic education concept, as well as of our students. So now, without further ado, let me invite Dr. Henan Cheng, Deputy Director, Center on Chinese Education Teachers College, to give us to open the program and introduce this distinguished guest speakers. So now, the podium is yours, Professor Cheng.
Thank you, Helena. Thank you for your wonderful introduction.
Great. Thank you very much, Helena, for your kind words and for your support. I would like to wish everyone a good morning if you're joining from China, and everyone good evening if you're joining from the Western Hemisphere. I'd like to thank all of you for taking this time out of your weekend to join our event, and we feel greatly encouraged that you have done that. And we have also benefited from the support of Beijing Normal University, Peking University Education Foundation, School of Comparative Education Studies at Beijing Normal University, etc. So we have been working with Ziran Education Foundation in the UK and launched a new initiative, which is about comparative education to explore holistic education. And today's event is it's a natural growth of that cooperative. In a society where we are probably losing the real meaning and goal of the education, this topic cannot have come at a better time. When we are besieged by crises such as the climate crisis, the pandemic, it prompts us to seek inward to reflect on the purpose of education. Krishnamurti, a great education, talked about how the core of education is about encouraging the whole person to blossom in virtue, so that the child or the person can connect with their life and soul and grow into their whole selves. Over the past 40 years, holistic education has become a global campaign. And this holistic education philosophies have taken inspiration from philosophers throughout history. Lao Tzu, Confucius, Plato, John Dewey, Maslow, many educators, philosophers, psychologists, and education practitioners all over the world and throughout history. And we are also trying to refine the theory and practice of holistic education so that we can balance the holistic development, including social, emotional, cognitive, and interpersonal skills of the children. And we are going to discuss the different models that are prevailing in North America, China, and elsewhere. We're also going to try to draw inspiration from our history and philosophy to talk about how to flourish in goodness, in the words of Krishnamurti. Today, we have convened experts, education practitioners, and teachers and principals. And we hope that our lesson, our forum will be helpful to you. And I first would like to introduce Dr. Henry Levin, who is William Hurt Kilpatrick Professor Emeritus of Professor and Education. And he is going to talk about the importance of holistic education.
Let's welcome Professor Henry Levin.
Thank you very much. This is a wonderful honor for me because, as many of you know, I have been to China many times and served as a professor for a semester at Beida. And I have many students who are so active in producing wonderful research, analysis, contributions to practice. And I think in principle, every one of them would be in favor of holistic education. So it's more a culture. I should also add that more than 100 years ago, we started a very healthy relationship with Chinese educators. And at Teachers College, we actually had more Chinese students than any other university nationally, as far as I can tell. I've tried to check this out, and they actually have numbers. And when these educators their names are mentioned today, they were really very distinguished educators that worked with Paul Monroe, who is the father of the comparative education field, and John Dewey, who was a colleague of his. And so it's something that we're very proud of and want to see in the spirit of what Paul Monroe and now Professor Cheng refers to as cross-fertilization of ideas. That is the relationship that we want to establish, as we believe Paul Monroe focused on establishing with China a century ago. I wanted to welcome all of you on behalf of the Center on Chinese Education. And our view is that schools are not just for increasing test scores, but they're for human development in all of its dimensions, including emotional and social growth, and a citizenry who can constantly either stop the bad things happening at the same time initiating good things, because we believe that only through a holistic education, not through memorizing a sheet of vocabulary or times tables or any one of these, that's the outer limit of education. At best, it's the inner limit, and we can do much better. So holistic education, as Professor Miller will emphasize, encompasses attitudes, feelings, emotions. It can even contribute to family relations, to all kinds of community and regional and national aspirations. And it represents in a sense, a rich set of possibilities that will never be exhausted when we think in terms of holistic. It is very sad to me personally, and I've written quite a lot about this, that quality of both individual human beings and of schools and countries is primarily measured by test score growth. I think that PISA has been wrong about this. And although recently in the 2018 PISA study, they have gone into what they consider to be social and emotional indicators, they're not very profound. There's a very, very rich literature, which I'm sure that Professor Miller will introduce to us. And the material used by PISA and the measurements are as culturally bound in OECD and PISA as they could be relative to what the field looks like. The emphasis on test score growth is very narrow. It often depends on sheer memorization, which in my opinion is not learning because it doesn't entail active use and application. It misses out on a lot of developmental needs, including health, nutrition, collaboration, social and emotional needs, and so on, that do lead to healthy learning and that are ends in themselves because they're good for development. There are some very, very interesting findings in that literature, and I would say that the literature is still really in its infancy. There are so many dimensions, and relative to the possible dimensions that we can add to schools, be way beyond the measurement of test scores. There are almost infinite possibilities. Despite the emphasis on test results, and this is one of the most interesting points for me. If one asks why people accept so quickly that the purpose of schools is to do well on stylized tests, and the student who has a few points more is a better student, smarter, more intelligent, and so on, one often gets the answer that adult success is dependent on the test scores, that's the most important criterion. That's never been shown to be, and to the contrary, I am an economist, and economists have been focusing on so-called non-cognitive measures of development and have found that all of these other dimensions are at least as important for success in terms of worker skills, family development and health, good relationships among people, collaboration, and so on, a whole set of important adult outcomes, emotional growth, physical and mental health, and so on. And Nobel Prize winner Jim Heckman even has argued that the so-called non-cognitive social, emotional growth, and so on have an even more important impact on economic productivity than test scores as they're measured in these days. Well, Studies suggest that these valued purposes, school purposes, are as important in healthy child development and later success in social relations and economic productivity as cognitive knowledge. And in many respects, they're more important depending upon what the outcome is that you're interested in. And so even for test scores, it's quite interesting. Even for test scores, when students develop in a healthy way socially and emotionally, they actually are able to improve their test scores as a consequence of these other dimensions, whether intended or not. And that's a fairly consistent finding. I've done research on two variants of holistic education. One is I'm associated with a movement called accelerated schools. And accelerated schools are not schools designed to make students learn faster, to memorize more items and to do it in a faster way. They're designed to build on the human needs and strengths that children come to school with. And the acceleration part then is in getting deeper into an understanding of a whole number of dimensions, far removed in some cases from what schools normally do in terms of their limiting the curriculum to a much narrower purview. These schools have had very good results. They do require a lot of involvement of teachers, creativity of teachers. They build on teacher strengths. They build on student strengths. And paradoxically, although they've been used mostly for schools attended by children who are so-called at risk or disadvantaged, the results are very, very strong for this group, going directly to what some would call a gifted and talented curriculum, although we don't like to use those terms because those terms are very stylized in practice, and this is much more than those terms connote. What we've done as a kind of pedagogical person, but an economist in our own activities, is we've looked at different interventions that are comprehensive, that focus on social and emotional approaches to education. And what we've done, and this is something that most educators are not familiar with, we've done benefit cost studies of them. One of the objections in the US to expanding these types of goals is that this is very expensive, it's very costly, it will take away from the focus on the test scores. And we don't want to do that because PISA will punish us for having done that. Well, what we've done is we've applied benefit cost analysis for 6 SEL interventions. All 6 of them are in the Council for CASTLE. I always say CASTLE and forget what the words stand for, but it's basically the Center for Organizing Studies and Research and so on in the US in the social and emotional area, which is not all of the holistic school by any means, but an increasingly important part of them. And our results compare the costs of expanding the roles of schools to capture these holistic results with the more traditional text-driven school. And what we've found is that the monetary value of the benefits far exceeds the costs of these efforts, far exceeds it, and contributes to other kinds of outcomes, not necessarily part of the intervention or intended, but with positive effects. And for the 6 interventions, we found the benefits were 11 times the costs, including benefits that society receives. And you'll say, well, what are those? I'll mention a few of them in just a moment. But the benefits results are based on higher education completions, and they're also based on high school completions, increases in them. Less juvenile and adult crime, less school absenteeism, less bullying, improved student health, better relationships in families, higher test results and creative use of knowledge, and ability to apply ideas and learning as opposed to simply memorizing lists. So China and US scholars and practitioners will work on holistic approaches in the spirit of cross-fertilization. In a sense, there's a lot out there to be discovered and to be tried and to be implemented in creative ways. And there's also, you might say, a community culture that must be transformed so that schools are not increasingly defined as test score mills that are used to evaluate all dimensions of human beings when they are not valid and have little validity in many areas in which they're used. We're very excited about this. I did want to mention that the Center on Chinese Education was established by my colleague Moon Sang 20 years ago. And it's through his inspiration, his ideas, his gentle assistance to all of us in understanding this, that we are very, very excited about moving into this tradition, again, with an emphasis on cross-fertilization, not on do this because we found out that this works. And so we have to talk about collaboration, partnership, not only with the two institutions, countries, but with others who are excited and who have established an interest in moving in this direction. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Hank. Thank you for your insightful and inspiring remarks. I agree with you that cross-fertilization is always a very important reminder for us to collaborate and understand each other. Thank you. Thank you again, Hank. So now let's welcome another world-renowned scholar, Professor John Miller, to give the first keynote speech. Professor John Miller is a professor with the Department of Curriculum, Teaching, and Learning at Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. His research interests focus on holistic education, spirituality in education, contemplation in educational settings, and curriculum orientations. Professor Miller has been working in the field of holistic education for over 40 years. He's author and editor of 20 books on holistic learning, including Whole Child Education, the Holistic Curriculum, and International Handbook of Holistic Education. His writing has been translated into 9 languages. The Holistic Curriculum has provided the program framework for the Equinox Holistic Alternative School in Toronto. Professor Miller has worked extensively with holistic educators in Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong for the past 20 years and has been a visiting professor at universities in Japan and Hong Kong. In 2009, Professor Miller was one of 24 educators invited to Bhutan to help that country develop their educational system so that it supports the country's goal of gross national happiness. Professor Miller teaches courses on holistic education and contemplative education at Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at University of Toronto. Professor Miller's most recent book is his memoir, A Holistic Educator's Journey, Seeking Wholeness in America, Canada, Japan, and Asia. Another book entitled Taoism, Teaching and Learning, a nature-based approach to education will be published next month. Both books are truly fascinating and enlightening. They present rich international perspectives and personal experiences on holistic education. I strongly encourage our audience to read both books. We feel very honored. Our center has opportunity to collaborate with Professor John Miller over the past year to promote holistic education. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor John Miller.
Thank you very much for inviting me to come. Thank you for your introduction, Professor Cheng. And I look forward to hearing other speakers tonight as we talk about holistic education. So if you could start with my PowerPoint, please. Yeah, so the goals of holistic education. First of all, wholeness. This is about developing the whole child. And also, again, the body, the mind, and the spirit. Also, the development of compassion. Again, all the major religious and spiritual traditions talk about compassion. And Karen Armstrong has developed a charter for compassion, which millions of people have now signed. I encourage you to go to the Charter for Compassion and sign that document. Again, compassion is about helping relieving the suffering of other people. Then wisdom. Wisdom is seen into the nature of reality, and reality at its core is interconnected and interdependent. And there are many like visions of this interconnected reality, and one of them comes from Chinese philosophy, and that is the Tao. The Tao is a conception of how everything is part of one. And so it's, again, for young people to see how they are in relationship. And so much of our education is, and again, and particularly in the West, is about individual achievement. And that is, again, not in harmony with the way reality is. Reality is interconnected. So education should be about helping students see how that they are in relationship to the earth, to each other, and to the cosmos. And so wisdom is so important as an aim of holistic education. Then well-being, that to develop healthy children and people in both physically and mentally. And again, there's such an emphasis now in the West on mental health because there is so much problems with people not being well. And so, and we know that people who are well contribute more to society than people who are conflicted or are hurting. So the more that we can have people who are healthy, that contributes more to our society. And then the final one is mastery. And what I'm talking about here is that, again, this is an image in holistic education that each child has a set of gifts. And the part of education is to let the child discover those gifts, develop those gifts, master those gifts, and then share them with the world. And that is so fundamental, again, to the well-being of our children, is to be able to develop the gifts that they have. And of course, each child has a different set of gifts. And that means that the teacher needs to be sensitive to that and to try to develop that. So these I feel are the main goals of holistic education. So next slide, please. So again, the whole child, and again, being home in our bodies. And again, in our society in North America, there is a problem at either end. There's a problem with young people being overweight, and at the other end we have people having eating disorders. So a holistic education is to let children be at home in their own bodies and not be overcome by the images that come with advertising about how they think that they should look. And again, things like yoga and qigong and tai chi are ways that we can help young people be more home in their bodies. Then then it's being connected to spirit or soul. And what is spirit or soul? It's the deepest part of our being. The deepest part of our being, which feels connected to the cosmos. And this is the part that is really like the core of our being. And the more that we can like nurture this, the stronger that sense of who we are develops. And also this is the source of creativity. Creativity comes from the soul. And then finally, thinking creatively and critically. And so be able to think critically, to be able to analyze and see what is based on evidence and what is not, but also to think creatively, to be able to generate ideas. So these are, I think, the fundamental aspects of the whole child that we are attempting to develop in holistic education. So next slide, please. Thank you. So whole teaching. So these are three approaches to teaching, and they all have a role in holistic education. First is transmission. This is where we learn from what I'm doing now. I'm transmitting, I'm lecturing, or we read from a text. So we gather information through transmission. Then transaction is more interactive between the teacher and the student, and between student and student. And it often focuses on thinking skill or problem solving, helping students solve problems and to think about problems. And then transformation. And then transformation is connecting with the inner part of the person, again, with their soul and spirit, and allowing that and nurturing that part of themselves. So the arts are very important here. The arts have a long tradition of connecting with the inner life of the child. So whole teaching, we use all three of these. If we get stuck in one of them, then we lose the rhythm. And actually what we try to do is we use all three. Each teacher develops their own like rhythm in using the three. So they may do a short lecture, then they may have an opportunity for students to interact and to talk about the ideas in that lecture. And then there'll also be opportunities for deep reflection and meditation and transformation. Okay, thank you. Going on to the next one. So then the whole curriculum. So again, the whole idea is to have a curriculum that focuses on connections, because the reality of nature is that it's connected. So how can we, so we try to have a curriculum that reflects the reality of nature. So these are 6 connections. You can have almost an infinite number, but these are the ones that I describe in my book, The Holistic Curriculum. So thinking connections. And I'm talking here about analytic thinking and intuitive thinking, and using both. There's been really an emphasis in our schools to focus on logical thinking, but that we also need to focus on the development of intuition. And all the great thinkers use both. And at the end of the Divine Comedy, Dante, he says, I use both my instinct and my intellect. So the instinct is the intuition and the intellect. And that is, again, a holistic view of thinking, and develop both of that. The body-mind connections, which I talked about briefly in the slide before, is again using different practices to connect the mind and the body because they're so closely related. Our thinking is connected to our bodies and being in touch with our bodies and showing the relationships. So again, having different, and again, a lot of emphasis on mindfulness is a way that you can work on this connection. And this is being more and more used in schools in North America, being mindful. Then connecting to the soul, connecting to that deeper part of ourselves. And again, I mentioned the arts, and being in nature is a way that we can and having activities for the child to be in nature nurtures the soul. Then subject connection, seeing how subjects are connected. And there are different levels here. One is where we just, a teacher in their own classroom attempts to connect subjects. So the history teacher tries to connect art and literature. So if there's a period of history that teacher is talking about, they bring in the art and the literature that was part of that period. Then the next level is where there's more integration, and you might have two teachers working together. Again, you can have a history teacher and an art teacher working together on a unit. So connecting those two subjects. And then finally, there are some schools that integrate the whole curriculum around themes. So they take a theme and they're able to integrate all the subjects around a theme. So again, in that environment, the student sees how subjects are related to each other and they're not separate. And the problem, and again, in our education system, is they think that all knowledge is like compartmentalized. And in reality, it's connected. So, and as much as that we can do to show how subjects are connected, allows, again, young people to see the nature of things, how things are interdependent. Then community connections is very important in holistic education, that first of all, that the classroom is a community and that the school is a community. And what does that mean? That means the student looks forward to going there because they're going to be recognized and validated as a person. And they're going to, again, there are schools the schools where this is very strong, they don't want to leave at the end of the day because they feel such a strong sense of community with their class and with the whole school. So community connections, and also connected to the community that surrounds them, having parents and other members of the community being involved in the school is also part of the connection that I'm talking about here. And then finally, earth connections, helping the student feel connected to the earth and having experiences with the earth. So in North America, there's an emphasis on gardening in some schools, and again, to try to have a living connection, not just reading about nature, but having a living experience. And in Korea, there's called the school forest movement, and that is where they plant trees on the school grounds or near the school grounds, so that the student actually helps in the choosing what trees are going to be planted and taking care of them once they're planted. And there's something like 600 schools now in Korea that have used this as a model, again, of how the student can have a living connection with the earth. And this is so fundamental now in the day of climate change, of giving students a sensitivity to our relationship to the earth and having an ongoing relationship. So the next one, please. So this is a school in Toronto that I've been connected with. It was started in 2009, and it's a school that goes from junior kindergarten, that's age 4, to grade 8. And they took my book, The Holistic Curriculum, and used those 6 connections that I was just talking about, and used that as a basis for some of the curriculum planning that they have done in that school. And so the 2 pictures here, you can see they start every morning. They go outside and meet in a circle where they do some exercises and maybe do some sharing in that circle. And the kindergarten program is done mostly outdoors. Even in the winter, the children spend a lot of time outdoors. And then we see in the other one that sitting in the circle where they share things and discuss things in a circle. And it's a school where it's a public school. It's not a private school. It's part of the public system in Toronto, but it's so popular they have a waiting list for students to get into this school. So it shows you that holistic school can be a success within a public system. Of course, there are many other examples of holistic education. That, of course, is Montessori education and Waldorf education. I understand we're going to hear from a Waldorf educator later this morning. And again, it's important to realize there are many different forms of holistic education, and each has its own strengths and advantages. So it's a broad spectrum of approaches that we need to be aware of when we're developing holistic schools. So finally, the next one. So the whole teacher, and a holistic education is so much based on the presence of the teacher. And in my work at the University of Toronto, I have put a lot of emphasis on presence. And what I mean by presence is the teacher is very present to the student. They're not thinking about something else when they're with the student. They're there, and the student can feel that. And how I attempt to develop that in the teachers that I work with, I ask them to meditate, because meditation is a way of learning to be present. By focusing, there are many different types of meditation, but one of the simplest one is just being present to the breath. And by learning to be present to the breath, we learn to be present. And we can carry that presence then into the classroom, so the student can feel our presence. And this is so fundamental, in my view, to holistic education, that our teacher education programs should have practices that develop the presence of the teacher. Then the other things that are important for the whole teacher is patience. And each child develops in their own rhythm, in their own way. And if we force a child to move in a particular direction, it just is not in harmony with the way things are. So, and this is often hard for a teacher. Patience is something in our society. We don't have much patience for very much of anything. Everybody's in a hurry. And we try to hurry. There were books written about the hurried child. And we should not hurry the child. Childhood is a very precious time. And we should allow ourselves to let children enjoy that time and not be pushing them. In North America, there's what they call the helicopter parent, who currently hovers over the child and is like pushing them in one direction or another. And of course, the caring of love is also very important. I've written a book on love and compassion, and I talk about 8 different kinds of love that exist that can be manifested in the classroom. And humility. Again, the teacher is constantly learning. It never stops learning. Learning more about the subjects they're teaching and more about the child development. And always having that sense of humility and and working with students. And finally, a sense of humor, of being able to, again, laugh at yourself, and it lightens up the whole environment of the classroom when a teacher has a sense of humor. So that's my what I feel are like the basic principles of holistic education, and hopefully in the panel we can talk a little bit more about some of the things that I've said. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Miller, for your comprehensive and insightful speech on the principles and practice of holistic education, especially the example of Equinox School in Toronto and the school in South Korea. We really look forward to learning more about the schools in the panel discussion session. Thank you so much again. Now let's move on to the second keynote speech by the UNICEF specialists, Dr. Haogen Yao and Mr. Bassem Nassar. Both Haogen and Bassem are education specialists at the UNICEF New York headquarters. Haogen is a focal point of education financing, digital learning monitoring, and data for education in emergency. Bassem is a focal point of skill development and mental health and psychosocial support. And he also played a coordinating role in the UNICEF flagship program of Reimagine Education, focusing on digital learning. Please join me in welcome Haogen and Bassem.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, happy Friday and happy Saturday. It was my great honor to be invited to speak here. Actually, when Dr. Cheng reached me about this forum, my first reaction is probably it's best for our education chief, Sana, Mr. Sana, at our Beijing office to present. But he is currently in Afghanistan doing emergency support. And for my colleague, Bassem, who really want to join, but he has a schedule conflict. So it's me here presenting to you. Let me share my screen. Yep, I have to confess that first, there's a difference between holistic education and holistic skills development. And second, this is not my big expertise, and therefore I try to narrow the topic a bit to the measurement of holistic skill development, which is something I got more exposure to, especially when I was an education specialist in the Middle East and North Africa. And for the structure of this presentation, basically I would present briefly the conceptual framework of the UNICEF holistic skill, then talk about the data gap in terms of measuring these skills and what are the potential solutions. And in the end, I do want to, as a Chinese father, call back to some connection between the current double reduction policy, 双减政策, and the holistic skill measurement. So, yep. So in United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, here we use a five-fold typology for the development of broad interconnected skills. There are foundational skills such as literacy, numeracy, digital skill, which allow individuals to use and understand technology, transferable skills or life skills, such as problem solving, negotiation, and critical thinking, entrepreneurial skill, which support business and social entrepreneurship, such as financing literacy, and the job-specific skill, also known as the technical and vocational skill that support older adolescents transition into workforce. Of these five skills, you can see that transferable skills are essential to all of us, and it acts as the glue of all skills, which is why we put in the center of this diagram. They together play a role in every aspect of our life. Skills like academic grit and problem solving may help us learn foundational skills like reading and mathematics. Skills like empathy help us to become good citizens, both of our own country and the world, and to become good employees and employers in the future. We need a whole range of skills like creativity and critical thinking to get a job or to start a business. These 5 skills are not mutually exclusive, but they have a huge programmatic relevance to our school world and life under the current context. For example, digital skill. I think all of us would agree that digital skill is vital during the pandemic for our learning continuity and for our job continuity, right? And back to transferable skill, I may spend more time on that. It's getting even more relevant during the pandemic. We need to navigate anxiety and foster resilience and empathy among children. We need to develop critical thinking in the context of infodemic and fake news. We also need to build self-management and communication capacity of children during the time of remote learning. We know that transferable skill can develop progressively since early childhood to the rest of our life. It can be taught and developed through learner-centered pedagogies, as Professor John Miller also just mentioned. And it can be measured with several approaches or instruments, but most instruments have not been developed for low-income countries. So this view on the screen is our global framework of transferable skill. It contains 4 domains: learning to be, learning to know, learning to get together, learning to live, or learning to do. And within each domain, there are 3 skills. So totally there are 12 skills. We select these 12 skills out of 200 skills through research with an extensive stakeholder engagement process, including different governments, including International Labour Organization, World Bank, UN Population Fund, UNESCO, 教科文组织, private sector, and of course, civic society. The development of transferable skill is a highly complex process that is not fully understood. One skill can affect other skill, and development is shaped by multiple internal and external factors, including experience in school, at home, with peers, parents, and others. Many education systems have promoted the development of these skills through different channels. And we know they're essential part of a non-formal education program as well. And as such, understanding what transferable skill children and youth have and what skills they need to develop is important for all stakeholders, particularly the young people themselves. So how do we know if children and youth have these skills? For the most part, we do not know the answer in a very accurate way. Ideally, learners would be observed in a wide variety of everyday situations to understand what skill they have in their arsenal to utilize in different scenarios. But in reality, this would be impractical and expensive to implement, especially on a large scale. So we must develop some different tools that give us this information more effectively and efficiently. Developing these tools is technically challenging. There's no global consensus on how to define specific transferable skills, how they progress, and what the right benchmarks of those skills should be. To complicate things further, the definition of some skill can differ based on cultural variations. For example, defining effective communication in Rwanda might look very different from what you define in Bhutan or here in our country or even in northern China and southern China, they can be very different. Over the past few years, there has been a growing interest by stakeholders in developing specific tools to answer some specific questions. For example, as a policymaker, how do I know if all young people in my country have transferable skill? As a teacher, do I know if my students are developing transferable skill? Or as a learner ourselves, how do I know that I possess the transferable skill that is needed for my future education or a better job landing? And by the way, I think it's very worth noticing that here, the holistic assessment of learning for teacher, the example we provide, it was actually conducted in Syria. My assumption is that if it can be conducted in Syria, it should be able to be conducted in most of the countries in our world. So there's a big potential. On the other hand, although the measurement instruments keep emerging in recent years, we know that the data gap remain huge. After mapping over 1,500 assessments in the past decade, my colleague and I found that only 38 out of 224 countries and territories have reported data on all 5 skill categories, while 48 countries and territories, or 1 out of 5 countries, do not have data on any of the 5 skills. We also realize that data gaps are especially prevalent among low-income countries, few of which have participated in large-scale assessment beyond foundational skill measurement. For us, for Chinese, the most famous one is probably PISA, right? The Program for International Student Assessment. We have 4 provinces participating in the PISA test. As a result, we see that only 5% of all low and lower middle income countries have data available on all 5 skills, which is much smaller than the 17% for the overall. In addition, we also found that only half of the country have data on digital or entrepreneurial skills. And in low-income country, they're less likely than high-income country to have data on digital, job-specific, and entrepreneurial skills. Lastly, but not least, we also found that the areas such as transferable and job-specific skills are often only partially addressed by existing assessment. For example, there are some well-known assessment on transferable skill, like the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study, ICCS, or even PISA, but they only capture 2 or 3 of the subset of the transferable skills. And for job-specific skills, right now, mostly we can only look at the participation to technology and vocational education, but there's very little data availability about the quality of this education. And I think this is a very relevant point to China as well, given our country's strategy of having almost 50% of our youth join the vocational education. So we know there's a huge gap. How do we fill these gaps? Here are some examples of new tools or innovation to existing tools that provide some potential solution. The first, to help address the lack of data on young and out of school children, as you probably know, many of the assessments are only conducted for those in school, but there are also people out of school. So to address this data gap, UNICEF has developed the foundational learning skill module in the 6th round of the multiple indicator cluster survey. This is the largest household survey in the world. The module covers both in-school and out-of-school children aged 7 to 14 years old and is the only household survey that collects this data. Data from this module can help us better understand the magnitude of the learning crisis and ensure no child is left behind. Second, to support data on digital skills, we have also updated the mass media and information and communication technology, ICT module, as part of the needs. The module collects data on the recent years of ICT skill in various computer-related activities among men and women aged 15 to 49 years old. Data from this module can improve our understanding on the prevalence of digital skills, on which only a little over half of countries currently have data. Better insight into this skill can help inform how we support children and youth to become digital literate. We are equipped to use digital learning solutions and prepare for the future in the digital economy. UNICEF has also supported the development of the Southeast Asia Primary Learning Metric, or CPLM. Along with our test of reading, writing, and mathematics, CPLM also has a module on global citizenship, making it the first large-scale assessment to measure global citizenship at the primary level. The first cycle of the CPLM was conducted in 2019 in 6 countries in the Southeast Asia. And lastly, also actually already mentioned several times in previous slides, UNICEF has begun working on standardized approach to measure transferable skill. That's the LSCE, Life Skill and Citizenship Initiative. In Middle East and the North Africa region, our colleagues are taking the lead on this. And life skill is basically transferable skill, except there's some nuance in definition. We have developed the tool, the instrument, measure grade 7 student proficiency in a set of core skills. So you see this graph before. So far, we have been able to test 9 out of the 12 skills. Here in this slide, it says 8 out of the 12, but I do think that we have the 45 items for communication already. So what's still under development is the testing for critical thinking, cooperation, and resilience. Finding from the LSCE can help countries develop policy and program to enhance life skills. The instrument is currently available in English and Arabic. In the interest of time, I'm jumping to this slide. And it was tested in 3 countries, Egypt, Tunisia, and the state of Palestine in 2019. Again, 2019, everything happened before the pandemic. The LSC is being finalized and will soon be available for use in other countries in the region. And there's also an opportunity to contextualize the LSCE to scale up the tool for wider international use. We really welcome collaborations on testing this tool in more countries. And just finally, allow me to refer back to the double reduction policy, which is part of the focus of this forum. As a Chinese daddy of 2 boys, I personally am very interested in how this double reduction would affect other skill developments of my children. So far, I can see that they are still the hungry child. The burden on them does not really decline, but it gets more diverse. So in the old day, maybe you have a lot of extracurricular class for mathematics, English, but nowadays it's a lot of sport, arts, science camp, like space science camp. And parents, including me, We also give extra tasks to our child at home. Like my younger son need to memorize one Chinese poem per day, and my elder son need to feed the tortoise at the balcony every day. I think this is also about living connection, as Professor John Miller mentioned. So very diverse, very diverse. The question is, what will be the result? In the old days, it's easy to know about the result. The result would be the test performance, right, in the old days. But now, our children are exposed to many other interventions. So how to measure the result? Even if there is a result, would that be cost effective? Are we as parents or are our government doing the right thing or doing the things right? And plus, what about the equity implication? Would that widen the gap of the child's achievement due to socio-economic background of their parents? I would say to answer these questions, we really need measurement, serious measurement of different skills, not just test results. So I guess I will stop here. Thank you very much, and let's keep in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Haugen, for your insightful presentation. It's very impressive. And I 100% agree with you. Measurement is very important. We cannot just rely on the test score, but measuring those different skills can be very challenging. And that's why we really salute the work you and your colleague has been doing worldwide. You know, your experience in different countries will present a very good example and for the policy making in China. Thank you so much. And also I have to point it out, the UNICEF friends, they're really working very, very hard. Right now, it's almost 10 o'clock. Dr. Xiao still working very hard in his office at UNICEF near the UN headquarters. And also he hasn't even had a dinner yet. So again, we really appreciate your time and your wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henan.
Now let's move on to our next session, which is the roundtable panel discussion. So here we will invite our Chinese partner who will be the moderator of this panel discussion, Kelly. So Kelly will be moderating the panel discussion with the three panelists, Professor John Miller and Principal Huang Zhengxiong from Taiwan, Miaoli Holistic Middle School, and Principal Li Zewu from Chengdu Waldorf School. Let's welcome.
Thank you, Professor Cheng. First of all, on behalf of Top Schools Education, co-organizer of the forum, I'd like to send my sincere appreciation to all the speakers and audiences supporting the development of holistic education. As an educational practitioner, and also as a mother of two kids, I'm a big fan of holistic education. But after hearing the speech and the presentation from Professor Henry Kevin, John Miller, and Dr. Haugen right now, I somehow feel also ashamed a little bit and regretted. Actually, I also asked my kids to recite timetable and also keep a close eye on their test scores. Today, we are very honored to have Professor John Miller, Principal Huang, and Principal Li to join our forum, talking about the opportunities and the challenges for the development of holistic education schools in a new era. I believe this discussion will benefit not only the educators, but also parents and the communities as a whole. So first, let me invite Principal Huang. Could you please briefly introduce yourself and your school?
Hello, 大家好，我是黄正雄，来自台湾。那我先介绍一下我们学校。我们学校在1995年建立。那1994年的时候，台湾发生了2件事情。第一件事是有2个台湾 最好的第一女子中学台北有2个资优生，他相约高2的学生相约到旅馆烧炭自杀了，这震惊了整个社会。那一年同年，台湾发起了一个教育改革运动，那是由这个台大的教授黄武雄先生，他是数学系教授，也是我在台湾大学的指导教授。那这个教改运动促成了当时的行政院，就是连战先生成立的一个行政院教改小组，由李彦哲，就是我们的诺贝尔奖得主，作为小组的召集人。
In that round of reform, many of the founders, of parents, of schools get to know each other, and we prepare to set up a school by following the parents and teachers' thinking. We started by building to have the construction work. We actually didn't get all the due government's paperwork, such as all kinds of due license yet. And then with the support of the society and media, as well as gradually getting the support from legislation body of Taiwan, so then eventually we get the approval to formally establish the school for holistic education. So many of the founders of the school are elites in the education. And then the whole process of establishing the school was very difficult, but it's followed alongside of the education reform in Taiwan. And then we now have full legal support in Taiwan for our school. This is the process of establishing the school. Thanks a lot for Principal Huang, and it is just a start in Taiwan and drawing a lot of attention from Taiwan for holistic education. And now I want to invite Principal Li from Waldorf School in Chengdu of mainland China. Would you also introduce your school, as well as we would play the school, photos of the school. It's an honor to meet with everyone at Cloud End. And then, so happy education is similar everywhere. It's like Taoism mentioned by Professor Miller. That philosophy is similar. And then Lao says that Tier 1 talents, if they hear about Taoism, they would be inspired. But then for lower tier talents, if they hear about Taoism, perhaps they would just laugh at it. So then perhaps let me share about the school. I started to teach at the age of 19, and then later I went to UK for further education of myself. I was thinking about whether we could explore different ways to teach students. Besides just teaching with several textbooks, textbook cannot cover everything. And then later I started to learn about Waldorf School. It started from early 20th century and have over 100 years of history. It is the holistic approach of education. And then in 2004, we started to create the school. Back then, there's only about 7 or 8 kids in kindergarten and primary school. I have been working for teaching in primary school for my lifetime. And then we started with 7 or 8 kids. Now we have a primary school, kindergarten, as well as a training school. We now have 700 or 800 kids. And then so education is just a progressing course. you perhaps would see some pictures about our school activities. So then there are some considerations about the timing and space to organize the teaching activity. So then there are also about mental education as well as spiritual education. And then world of education perhaps would be similar and holistic education. People would think about healthy development of physical and spiritual development. In those pictures include campus activities as well as the overview of the school and also blackboard drawing. Blackboard drawing becomes more and more rare. These are drawn by kids at grade 6. They would draw once every half month. So this picture is drawn on autumn festival. You could see the wine there. Although drinking wine is not good, but if you look at the jar, you would want to drink it, right? Thanks a lot for Principal Li, and look forward to visit your school.
Hi, Professor Miller. Thank you very much for your presentation. And actually, I think your presentation gave me a very holistic view about holistic education right now. And actually, you mentioned both a case study of Equinox School in Toronto and also another school in Korea, in South Korea. So you have a very profound research in different cultural background. I would like to ask for your opinion, how to promote holistic education in different cultural background?
Well, I think that it's important to, in particular, most of my work outside of Canada has been done in Asia. And in Asia, there are, in each culture, there is underlying that culture, there is like a holistic perspective. So I'm talking about Taoism and Buddhism and Confucianism. All of these are holistic disciplines, if you will, that have been in the culture for centuries. And holistic education wants to like bring that out. And so, but the problem has been that a lot of these countries have adopted a Western education that is more like rational and logical and has ignored the intuitive aspects of like Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism. And so it's what I've tried to do in my work is to be sensitive to those aspects of Asian culture and try to build an education approach that is in harmony with that. So that's what I've tried to do. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, we are working with quite a lot of international schools or schools who are using international curricula partially or wholly here in China. I think we call it now, it's year 3.0 here for the development of international education. A lot of schools are trying to make integrated curricula, so both with Western ideas and also with the Oriental traditions and cultures. I believe your new book will be a very big help to all of our educators here as well.
Now, question for Principal Li. During your work on World of Schools, you encountered a lot of challenge and difficulties. Throughout the process, whether you heard any misunderstanding about the holistic education, holistic school. We started from actually 2004, then the year before last year, the think tank of People's Daily newspaper had a survey saying that actually for holistic education is actually a very localized thing. We were thinking about between Western society and China society, that in the philosophy of Waldorf school, there's a lot of Oriental philosophy being integrated in Waldorf school. And then one of my colleagues saying that Steiner also quoted a lot of writing from Lao Tzu. Steiner quoted his philosophy. So then we need to find a common ground between Western philosophy and Oriental philosophy for education. And so then several areas of work. One is to explain what is Waldorf education. It is definitely about cultivating students to be a good person and a capable person. But what would be the specific work based on Waldorf school philosophy? So then it is also about whether we just replicate foreign experience or perhaps build on the foreign experience. And then we should progress with time. And this is the first thing, to progress with time and integrate Oriental and Western philosophy. And then second thing is we also need to look at national education policy as well as cultural characteristics. For example, in Sichuan province, we would have some unique culture, which is also in line with Waldorf education. And then actually there's no shortcuts anyway, but I see some shortcuts that for children to strengthen our education work. There are a lot of deep debate about what is the better for kids. But then when we talk about kids, everyone is easy to reach a common understanding. This is very good for kids. It is just an instinct, because say that kids would have to read a lot of textbook, then that is a heavy burden for them. And then we see different process and different stages. First is to just follow one step after another about what education professionals do in Western society. But then from Greta, he also said that so then no matter whether it's Western or Oriental society, but we actually all have a whole global society. And then education is just about a detailed work, because being a teacher and administrator as well as a researcher, I would say that there would be basic rules for schools to in line with national policy, for example, like the double reduction policy. And then we would also be a demonstrative project to participate in many of the national level forum as a Waldorf school. And in this process for education and school management, as well as cultivating and development of teachers and evaluation of teachers' performance. Perhaps not only me, but also Principal Huang, we would also think about how to cultivate teachers. And then as for the school curriculum, we would need to consider about the national requirements and policy. So this is about curriculum consolidation, but it also needs a space and time. I think that when you see that children are blossoming, when they are climbing trees, when they are trying to relive what they are taught in the classroom, that creates connection between the teachers and the students, and that's what makes more people believe in the outcomes of this type of education. And Principal Huang was just talking about how he started with these school experiments in Taiwan in the mid-1990s. And I believe that there are many similarities across the different models of education. And well, I just wanted to say that holistic education is possible. Thank you. Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Li, for your insight on the introducing the philosophy of education and how you were able to harmonize the philosophy of Waldorf education and what is needed in China. So, well, holistic education, according to Principal Huang, has actually, well, holistic education has been in development over decades. Could I please ask Mr. Huang about the opportunities and challenges that you have encountered? Sure. So first, I'd like to address some myths about holistic education. The first and probably the biggest myth about holistic education is just learning a bit about everything and then you're holistic, right? And the second myth is about is believing that holistic education is about the self-realization. So first, I'd like to talk about my take on holistic education in China as well as in the Western world. I think the Confucian philosophy is about holistic education. It is about an education that teaches people to appreciate beauty in nature and everywhere. And I think that this education on cultivating a virtuous personhood, what Confucius believes in, I think that is holistic education. That is beauty expressed in character. And I think this virtuous personhood proposed by Confucius is the classical Chinese equivalent of holistic education, or the whole person. And there is an important Chinese scholar by the name of Wang Guowei. He is erudite, and I think he is a very good example of holistic education. And there's another educator who put up a monument for Mr. Wang Guowei, commending him for his pursuit, academic and spiritual, as well as independence. And I think these things are very important. You have to be independent in spirit and free in thought. I think that these two things capture very well what I believe is the Chinese take on holistic education. And for holistic education in the West, there is a German author, and he talks about how you have to have a cognitive-based aesthetic appreciation of life, and that is when you can become a whole person. He talks about how your creativity, your critical thinking, and your intellect all have to be harmonized. And I think that is probably my idea of the Western take on holistic education. So in light of that, I would like to refute the two myths. If you learn a little bit about everything, but very superficially, that is not holistic education, but that is what basically every school who professes to do holistic education is doing. Rather, holistic education is about a deep investment. It is about deep involvement from a spiritual aesthetic point of view. And the second myth, that holistic is about self-realization. No, it is rather about harmonizing interpersonal relationships, the relationship between yourself and the rest of your community. And it is about achieving common goals through communication and collaboration. So thinking about how self-realization is the goal of a holistic education would wrongly put the focus of holistic education on the individual, rather not on the community. And we see school experiments in Taiwan. Well, we have unveiled this new curriculum called 1.29, and their holistic education has this model about interaction, about community, and it is competency based, and it is not knowledge based. Well, competency or proficiency or mastery, I'm not quite sure which exact word corresponds to the word in Chinese, but I think you get an idea of where they are headed. However, they are not doing this in the best way possible because they try to bite off more than they can chew. They try to encompass as many subjects as possible, and the students end up learning just very superficially about everything. And about competency. Competency is not developed in a vacuum by students learning by themselves or at home. It is refined through interaction between the students and other students. And that is something that we are trying to instill in new practices of holistic education in Taiwan. And I have been on an advising council in trying to design the new curriculum, but I still see how in practice this leads to an over-fragmentation of different disciplines. Great, thank you, Principal Huang. You gave a very interesting overview of the Chinese and the Western role models for holistic education. And you also addressed some of the challenges, both old and new, in holistic education experiments in Taiwan.
Then I'd like to address to Professor Miller. Here, actually, we have a question from the audience. Jack Ho said, sometimes I don't really believe every kid has a talent, even though I always pretend to believe they have one. May I ask you, what's your definition of talent?
Well, I prefer to use the word gift rather than talent because I just think it's more in harmony with a holistic view of things, if you will. And it's the idea, which I talked about briefly, that each person on the planet has a gift. And the role in life is, first of all, discover your gift. What gifts do you have to develop within you? And then to develop that gift and then to share it with the world. That is really what, if we could have that idea of in our schools, and there are schools that have been based on this. One is the Sudbury Valley School in Massachusetts, which is it tries to get each student to again define what their gift is and to develop it, and then when they graduate, they're going to either go into university or into work that's based on the gift that they've developed. And it's very individual. I mean, there's a huge range of different things that gifts and skills and talents that they have developed in the school. So it's again, so much our education is like a factory. We want all the kids to learn the same thing, and they come out like widgets from a factory. Well, that's the Sudbury Valley School, and also Summerhill is you are developing unique gift that a person has to give to the world, and that is really what the whole school. And of course, the curiosity is so fundamental to those schools as well. Again, so many of our schools, there is no emphasis on curiosity at all. It's like covering the curriculum. And all the great art and science has come from curiosity. And our schools have, and Einstein talked about this. He said, our schools have failed miserably in the development of curiosity. And so those schools that I mentioned, and I think most holistic schools do try to develop the child's curiosity, because if we squelch the curiosity, the child will die intellectually, emotionally. And that is what I think in terms of talent and gift, that is what education should be about. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Miller. I think to keep the curiosity and also to develop the curiosity is actually the beauty of education.
Great. I have this question for Mr. Lee. So you talked about how the Waldorf education is aligned with the Chinese national curriculum and has been attaining good achievement outcomes. Professor John Miller was just saying how holistic education has to nurture and protect the students' curiosity, and at the same time, it has to align with a national curriculum. I know this is by no means easy, and I would like to know how you do it at Waldorf School. Sure. There are actually 3 versions of the Waldorf School in Chengdu. We've gone through a 1.2 era, a 2.0 era, and a 3.0 era during the 18 years that we have been in existence. 1.0 was more about just taking the Waldorf curriculum and translating those to Chinese and trying to copy paste it to Chengdu. But then we realized that some things didn't work, so we had to change those. And also we had to find our own ways about doing things. In the beginning, we thought we were a little bit extreme. In the beginning, we went through the phase of thinking everything that was originally in the Waldorf curriculum was good. But then we lost our own ideas. In the beginning, we had these struggles about should we do this because the Waldorf German teachers did this, or should we trust our own judgment in coming up with potentially better ways? And then we advanced to the 2.0 era, where we adopted 60% of the original Waldorf teachings and had 40% of our own ideas. So that was 2.0. And this is just about teaching. I'm just leaving out the education management and teacher assessment out of my description here. And of course, we had to figure out a way to make all the moving parts work together during the 2.0 era. And I think even during the 2.0 era, we still focused on grades and achievement test scores, and that created a lot of pain for all parties. And also we had to deal with public discourse, because the public believed that for a school, the better the test scores of the students, the better it is. And the more students you have, the better you're doing. So I thought that it would be more important to sort of try to motivate a cultural change. We try to bring some Chinese culture into the Waldorf school. Even though Waldorf was based on Western ideas, we weren't exactly sure whether we could keep these Chinese cultural traditions that we ended up introducing to the schools. And we weren't sure whether this integration would persist. And then we were in the 3.0 era, and that is basically understanding how to make Waldorf education work within the national curriculum. And of course, that was challenging.
The Dean Professor Liu from Beijing Normal University also gave us great support to the Waldorf school. He says that it is better that you could insist on the principle of Waldorf school, but also integrate with China national education policy. In this process, I believe that one focus which we should value more would be about children's development at different stage. We need to have further exploration on that, but I believe it is practical to encourage kids to have study by different approaches, such as the study by feeling, study with more logic, as well as study with stronger willpower, as well as the strong emotion in puberty, and then also the change of way of thinking from the age of 12 to 14 years old. And then the double reduction policy, let people realize that test score is not the solution to the education. It perhaps would be a dead end, leading us to nowhere. And then we realize that for kids in their childhood, they should learn while playing, and then from the age of 7, they should have some simple study, and then they would have inertial, but then dragging by inertial power, parents would have the anxiety that if they don't send their kids to after-school tutoring institute, parents would feel anxious and may get panic. The parents even would not care about what is the results the kids could get from after-school tutoring classes. But then the reality is that the national government is taking it very serious to treat after-school tutoring institute business. Then in kindergarten period, for our curriculum design is about the content of education. For example, like how to spend the kindergarten, and then how to treat or live every holiday. And then kids would also face their own challenge and difficulty. For example, like they could learn on physical skills, but then for example, like Professor Miller mentioned about meditation by teachers, it is also similar philosophy in China. For example, Confucius says that I reflect myself 3 times per day, which is also a kind of meditation. And so with our training school, we also have such exploration about how to provide education for students in puberty. And then in kindergarten, a kind of study while playing, to primary school, to semi-abstract learning, and then to junior high school, like more logistic thinking. We need to give kids time and space to adapt to the progresses. And then we were thinking about how to change the different way of kids to facilitate with their study in different approach, study with mainly reading graphics, or study by learning and thinking with a logical mindset, and then to guide them about how to learn to change the world, eventually taking social responsibility. We believe that we need to explore our ways while we are organizing and operating our school. It is a kind of joint establishment and joint development process, including parents' participation. Thank you a lot for Mr. Li and word of also start to cover senior high school in Beijing, but not in Chengdu. I believe it is a bold integration to finally reach the target for holistic education, to have a comprehensive development for kids, both physically and mentally. And then a question for Principal Huang. You majored in mathematics in university, but it seems like in your school, kids are left to mostly to have self-learning for mathematics courses. Why is that? And then in Miaoli school, how to avoid the diversified curriculum causing confusion to students? Answer is that for self-learning, it is not a accurate description. It is more about self-driven learning, self-directed learning. So perhaps when people talk about it, perhaps people would say about self-learning, but it is actually more about self-directed or student-centered learning. In our school, we would encourage students to have their own plan for their progress and timeline. And then they need to identify what is a problem they do not understand, and they need to decide how to make discussion with their teacher for the problem or question they don't understand. When the students have such self-awareness and self-driving study, they would have different behavior and reaction in the classroom. The way of test score driven teaching approach is not a natural or harmonious way. We need to encourage students to be self-centered and self-driven. If they have a self-incentive to take the course of learning mathematics as a process of driven by themselves, and having strong willingness to learn, it is not only for examination purpose, but because it is interesting and funny for them. For example, like solving a puzzle within 2 weeks, they would have a sense of success and accomplishment so that they would be inspired to learn more. I believe it is a kind of a holistic study experience. And then for mathematics, it is a form of art. For many years, I would use the original text of Euclid's to teach kids, so that without the original text, kids would not have way to appreciate the aesthetical thinking in Euclid's textbook, how to change a box with multiple legs to change it as a same area square shape. So then in our curriculum design, we have 3 principles. First is the spontaneous and the self-driven features. Any content, if there are 5 kids being willing to study, we would organize teacher to provide teaching for that kind of content. For example, like German language or French language, or perhaps painting that kids have strong willingness to learn. They would submit application at least by 5 kids together, and we would organize. And then another thing is to encourage kids to have their enthusiasm, and then teachers and students could jointly submit funding to the school, for example, to pursue certain learning experience, for example, to create a vocal concert disc. And then some people take 2 years to study about the structure of automobile, from the whole car to each component as well as the structure. And that would be the work of their graduation. And then they would take the graduation article as the paper they apply for further education in foreign countries. This is a kind of in-depth study. And then the third is the public sharing feature. So that's all the students would talk about a public topic and topics related with their daily life to make a joint decision. And they would make such discussion. And then in classroom, we would also highlight the student-centered feature. One example is tonight at 7 p.m. we would set off to climb a mountain in east part of Taiwan. It is a very beautiful mountain. We would have everyone participating from all students and faculty. It is fully organized and planned by the students themselves. They would select students, leaders, and then to cover different topics such as logistics, as well as transportation, as well as the necessary communication with the local context. This is also part of our curriculum design. One is spontaneous participation, and second is the enthusiasm about engagement, and the third is about public sharing. And thanks a lot for Principal Huang. Someone like Professor Miller saying that to follow the curiosity of kids, to empower them and let them learn actively so as to develop them with transferable skills. This is inspiring to many of our audience. And thanks again for all the participants in the round table. Time seems to be flying. We see a lot of message left by audience. And due to the time limits, we would not go to answer those questions. We would save the questions to the Q&A session. Finally, I want to quote a quote from Indian scholar. Education is not to get certain target, but actually it is guide your way to find solution in all different problems, so that you would not be arrogant, you would be innocent and curious, so that you would be full of confidence. So thank you, everyone, again. And now let me leave the floor to Helena.
So it's really exciting to hear about the best practices of your school, Principal Huang and Principal Li, as well as your thinking, the rationale actually in the pre-design, in-process, and post-implementation of your holistic curriculum, holistic teaching, and the holistic education. So, and also thanks Yaling and colleagues for the amazing interpretation. Before we move to the next session on the agenda, let us take a minute to thank Professor Levin, Professor Miller, Dr. Xiao, again for their engaging talk and presentation and the generous sharing of knowledge. From the overview of the global education background, the review of the fundamentals in the concept, the full definition of the whole curriculum, define the global framework for the transferable skills, as well as the useful survey modules, matrix, to mirror the development of holistic education. I believe our audience are well prepared to transit to the next session.
Switch to Chinese for the following keynote speech. 好，现在我们就
Okay, I'm going to switch into Chinese, and we are going to do the last two keynote speeches. We are glad to have with us the director of the School of Comparative Education at Beijing Normal University to talk about the inspiration of holistic education to Chinese education. Professor Liu has been analyzing holistic education since 2004, and he has also talked about the opportunities that it has inspired for Chinese education. And now almost 20 years have passed, and there has been greater adoption and uptake for holistic education. And I think it's a good opportunity to talk about whether it has some lessons and ideas for this new day and age. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Liu. I would like to talk about the history and the evolution of holistic education in China. First of all, we also have our own history of holistic education. And I'd like to talk about how some of the attempts we have made in order to combine the Western and Eastern traditions of holistic education. So first of all, Professor John Miller did a very good keynote speech. I would like to say that John Miller and R. Miller have been foundational in this development of holistic education, focusing on cultivating the whole person that is developed physically, intellectually, skill-wise, in moral aspects, and spiritually, and rather than making the person a tool for economic or political ends. So holistic education, its development in China did not only come from Western thoughts on holistic education, but is also rooted in Chinese traditional philosophies. So first of all, we also have the traditions of holistic education in China. So as I was writing my paper on holistic education, I traced it back to ancient times in China. And I traced it to Jean-Henri Rousseau, Paul Newman, Humboldt, Emerson, John Dewey, Montessori, Rogers, Maslow, and also Confucius. And based on Chinese history, we can see that we have been emphasizing on holistic education ever since Confucian times. And this is because that is the core pursuit of education in China. And Principal Huang mentioned the foundational thinking behind holistic education in China. For example, Confucius talked about the virtuous personhood, about becoming a full person or a benevolent person. And let's trace back to Analect, Confucius' thoughts about what he meant about becoming a full person. So in response to a question raised by his disciple Zilu, Confucius said that if a person is wise, if a person is free from unreasonable desires, if a person has courage and is fearless, and also is well-versed in the arts and culture, and in costumes and rituals, that makes a person a full person. And Confucius thought has actually set the tone for education in traditional times in China. And Wang Guowei, the scholar, also mentioned by Principal Huang how the holistic person is basically should be a part of holistic education that is free in thought and also independent in spirit. And then in early Republic of China period between 1911 and 1949, a famous educator, Cai Yuanpei, talked about educating citizens with a well-developed character. And that was why he proposed pragmatic education, national education, ethical education, amongst other factors. In 1957, Chairman Mao also talked about a well-rounded education that emphasizes on ethics, intellect, and physical education. And then in 1995, we passed the education law of the People's Republic of China, and we emphasized training the next generation of people who can be a part of our socialist society that is developed in ethics, intellect, physical education, amongst other aspects. So basically, I think that this pursuit for holistic education has been around since almost time immemorial in China and in the West, and it has also been nourished from by thoughts of educators such as Zhang Jui, Humboldt, and others. So basically, in mid-19th century, we saw that the positivist approach became prevalent over a more humanist approach to education. And that basically led to specialization. And Herbert Spencer wrote about what he thought was the most valuable type of knowledge. And he emphasized on scientific knowledge. And since positivism, or the emphasis on science, became the focus of education rather than the humanities, then schools began to emphasize subject teaching and specialized skills. And as a result, there was an overemphasis on specific subject-related skills. And that is how the humanities became pretty much marginalized. That has had an important emphasis in the West. And when we introduced education philosophies from the West to China, we sort of copied that model with the emphasis on a positivist approach and with the emphasis on science. And that was reflected in how we developed our schools. In the past, we focused on developing inner knowledge through education. And then we focused on a more pragmatic approach. Back in the 50s, we learned from the former Soviet Union model and reformed how we had the different disciplines and majors in the schools. But in the past, we did not have a whole lot of specializations. And the majors themselves were rather broad. But by 1953, we had 215 types of majors in our higher ed institutions. And by 1980, we already had 1,039 majors. In other words, there was an increase in specialization, and students became more specialized in an ever narrower set of skills and knowledge. So in other words, that hindered the well-rounded development, which was one of the education pursuits. And in that problem was brought to the attention of educators in China in the 1980s. Mr. Pan Maoyuan, an important educator, talked about how there has to be an emphasis on general skills as well as specialization skills, and only with the two can a person adapt to the needs of modern times. In 1995, the director of Central Academy for Educational Sciences, Mr. Meng Mingyi, wrote a journal article saying that the purpose of university education is to educate people to be full persons rather than making tools for a machine. And up until now, and up until then, there has not been that many reflections about the focus on education, not training to fulfill a purpose, but rather to focus on the full development of a person's character and personality. And when I wrote my doctoral thesis, I also quoted from this educator. At the turn of the century, there was another important educator, Mr. Yang Shuzi, who used to teach at Polytechnic University of Central China. And he talked about that humanities should be given the foundational role in education. He emphasized that the goal of university education is to educate the people and not making tools. Whereas we should not train university students to be highly specialized tools. And educator Mr. Wenfu Xiang at Central China Science and Technology University talked about how up until then, university education ignored the lively, the dynamic aspect of people, of students, and they did not, through their education, train students to be fuller, better, more real people. And he talked about how the purpose of education is to make sure that people are fully developed rather than turning them into machines or compromising their personhood. So we have been seeing basically a lot of deep reflections on this prevalent trend up until the 80s on focusing on turning students into perfect tools and rather full persons. And based on this literature review, it seems like these scholars were just calling in the wilderness, whereas their ideas did not attract a whole lot of traction in the real world, even though they provided very deep and realistic insights about about education in China.
In 1970s, we see the rise of holistic education philosophy, and then it was spread across the world. To the year 2000, when China started to have more introduction about holistic education. For example, like Professor Fan Yuhong has a writing about the practice of holistic education to the whole holistic value of the world, especially Professor Fan and Professor Zhang Zhonghai, as well as Professor Yang. Their research reflects the global thinking of holistic education, as well as their practice. And then based on that, they raise their own opinion and further research. I also wrote 2 papers. One is related with the practice of holistic education. The other is about the holistic education thinking and the change of the education targets. Then we could let me share about what are the problems that are reflected by the holistic education. Holistic education is a thinking to facilitate and promote holistic development of people. It has critical thinking about the problems such as to make people as the tool of solving different people and having fragmented education and mechanical education. It promotes enrich spiritual world and facilitate the holistic development of people. So it has the contemporary value. And one thing is to promote the holistic development of students. It advocates for educating a whole person to encourage people to have all-round development in both physical knowledge, skill, and ethics, as well as intelligence, spiritual, and soul, as well as creativity. And then secondly, it is the curriculum design based on holistic experience. In China, both in Western society, schools would set different subjects. Well, for holistic education, it promotes to set up the wide linkage between different subjects and discipline, so as to set up cross-discipline courses and enrich students' experience, so as to overcome the problem of overly stressed different major among students. And then the third point is to let students actively develop in experience. It emphasizes on the teaching methodology to be based on experience and organic, personalized education approach. It objects against the teaching target which overly focus on test scores and academic performance ranking. Although perhaps we would not be able to 100% accept and adopt such philosophy, but we should start to know about and understand the merit of such philosophy. And then teachers should play the role of facilitator, partner, and learner, as well as the companion for students, as well as the spiritual mentor. Teachers must be present, be there for students, and must care for their kids sincerely. When holistic education is introduced to China, we have different exploration in different regions in China. Such exploration is not only influenced by Western philosophy, but also influenced by Chinese traditional culture on holistic development. It also has been influenced by different religion.
那么在我们国家，首先是在台湾地区，在我们的香港地区，进行了相应的一些探索。在台湾，就像我们黄校长所讲那样子，很多学校、很多幼儿园，特别是教会学校，那么在立校宗旨上都打出了全人教育的这么一种旗帜。像辅仁大学 像中原大学他们都是非常强调这个全人教育的。那么在香港，许多学校，特别是高等学校，那边也将全人教育作为自己的教育指导思想。你像浸会大学浸会大学在建校不久，他们就确定了全人教学的这种办学理念，强调要提供完整的教育，使学生在学问、思想、专业技能、人格修养方面都得到均衡的发展成为具有创造力的领袖和具有责任感的公民那么在我们台湾地区和香港地区，他们在90年代和21世纪初的时候，那么也都提出了以全人发展、全人教育为目标来推进相应的改革。那么从这个意义上来讲，他们不但是学校在探索，不但有理念方面的探索，而且在改革实践方面也进行相应的一些探索。那么在我们中国大陆一些大学、中小学、幼儿园特别是幼儿园他们提出了以全人教育作为自己的指导思想以培养全人作为自己的目标。那我们国家学校提出要培养全人，那么培养全人实际上它和我们国家从政府层面所提倡的德智体美劳全面发展的这种培养目标是一致的，并不是相对立的。那么全人他也并没有否定马克思主义所强调人的全面发展学说，实际上它也在一定程度上反映了马克思主义关于人的全面发展学说的精神实质。那么全人是一个真正全面发展，是一个完善的人是具有主体性和能够把握自己命运的人，是作为工具的人，是作为人的人，而不是作为工具的人，是整全的人，而不是全缺的人。这和马克思所强调的自由和谐发展、全面发展人是完全一致的。所以这种理念在我们国家有了非常强的号召力。那么隆米勒曾经讲过这个整体而言，教育被主流文化、世界观，尤其是共识意识所引导。该共识意识控制着什么适合或者什么不适合思考和生活的可接受的方式。那么我们必须承认，那么现在主流的价值观那么并不是那么支持全人培养，特别是在这种人才竞争这种越来越激烈的这么一种环境之下，那么我们觉得完全的实施全人教育是有一定的困难的。那么全人教育，我讲更多的像全面发展教育一样，它是一种理想，它与主流文化、与主流的世界观，特别是共识意识有许多矛盾的地方、冲突的地方因此我们如果就像我们刚才讲到的那些书里边，以及特别像隆米勒约翰米勒他们所倡导的那些全人教育的理念全人教育的思想那么如果完全想实现这么一种思想，现在看来是不太可能的但是它是一种理想追求，我们又不能够放弃。就像隆米勒所讲的那样子，全人教育是一个梦想，但是梦要让它实现这就是我今天要给大家汇报的内容。谢谢大家。
非常谢谢刘教授我觉得听完您的讲演，我第一感觉是，如果没有请您来，我们今天这个 International Forum 国际论坛的视野就不完整，称不上国际。因为我们大家一看这个 Holistic Education 全人教育这个专有名词，我们下意识都是会追溯到上个世纪60、70年代这个思潮的兴起，后来的发展实施，但殊不知或者经常被我们这些关注国际教育的人忽略的是，其实中国传统文化当中，早潘茂元先生或者更早到蔡元培校长的教育理念，无不渗透的这种对于人的全面发展的关注，只是我们所以说这是对我们这种做国际教育比较的人尤其需要关注的地方，就是对于中国传统文化当中渗透出来的同一种理念，只是用不同的术语表达出来的东西，和国际上的思潮在做对比的时候要做一个平行的分析和完整视角的考察。非常感谢您的这个报告，我觉得非常的完整，谢谢您，刘教授。
谢谢。
好，下面呢，我们就请中国教育学会研究员中央教育科学院科学研究所研究员，中国地方教育史志研究会学会史志分会的理事长楚朝晖博士 给我们进行双减政策下的全人教育的主题演讲。我们大家都知道，楚老师是资深的教育学者当中特别愿意为普及对教育本质的理解、梳理教育的底层逻辑和解决根源性的问题大声疾呼的那一群资深学者之一。所以作为普通受众呢，我经常会在媒体端学习楚老师对各种热议的教育问题的看法和思考。相信今天呢，楚老师的演讲肯定还是会像以往那样子那样的风格哈，深入浅出的替我们去论述双减政策下围绕全人教育的一些思考。我们洗耳恭听，楚老师您请。
好，谢谢。那么前面几位呢，我听到都是理论上讲的很好的，就是也从这个历史，从其他各方面的展现出这个全人教育的中西的这样一种比较。那么我讲的呢，主要是结合当下的实际，因为今年呢，中央办公厅和国务院办公厅发布了一个双减的这个意见，这个意见呢，事实上跟我们当下讨论的这样一个全人教育是有直接的相关的。那么所以我今天讲的这个话题呢，叫双减政策下的全人教育。关于这样一个话题呢，事实上首先我们还是涉及到这个评价的问题。因为我们长期以来实际上就是依考定终身，这个依考定终身呢，对学生呢实际上有很大的伤害，而且这个时间延续的很长，在一个标准来评价所有学生的时候呢，事实上就很难做到全人。那么这一个标准呢，最终呢，它又集中到知识的标准，而不是人格成长发展的标准。那么在这种情况下呢，我们特别是就是人出生以后，到这个至少是小学阶段嘛，对自然的这种非常就是敏感、非常关键的这一段时间呢，他不能亲近自然。然后到少年阶段，对社会的了解又是关键期、敏感期，他又没办法去了解社会，没有时间，没有空间，没有办法选择主题，所以就造成了我们很多的孩子他的成长发展呢是不可能是全人的。特别是我们这些年呢，就是造成了一个新的问题，就是包括学生的身心成长造成的伤害。身体的伤害呢，最典型的表现就是我们这个近视，我们这个肥胖又引发这个我们心脏的问题，引发其他的一系列的问题。现在我们中小学生这个肥胖率比例大比例增加，接着下来引发一些心理的问题。最近这些年我们学生的中小学生呢出现了比较高比例的这种自杀。那么这一类问题的产生呢，我认为深层次的它的逻辑就是由于学生的自主性受到压抑，自主性受到压抑以后呢，他就难以形成健全的人格，他的人格就成了一个被动性。那么人格的被动性呢，又引发他的行为，他的活动一系列的问题。所以呢，要解决这些问题呢，事实上深层次的是在我们整个管理体系，怎么样从一个单一的集中权力的管理体系、评价体系，转向多样的分权的这样管理体系，这才是这个深层次的原因，要解决这些问题。那么为此呢，我们就是中国的政府已经是采取了很多措施，包括去年发布的就是深化教育改革的评价的总体方案，提出破五违。那么明确的提出呢，要改进结果评价，要强化这个过程评价，同时要探索增值评价。增值评价在中国的用的相对比较少，也有一些学校已经在用健全综合评价。那么这个文呢，实际上是解决了一些宏观问题，实际上提出一些理念，可操作性呢依然是不够强的。所以接着下来呢，我们今年就是5月份，深改委开会，就是要发布关于减轻学生作业负担和校外培训负担的这样一个文，通常呢我们大家都称为双减的这个文。 双减的稳呢，实际上它的关键在于一个是解决教育的功利化、短视化的问题。那么所谓功利化、短视化呢，又是聚焦在只看考试分数。它的具体体现是只看考试分数，不看学生多样化的各个方面的成长发展。那么事实上呢，我们这样一种学生的发展状况呢，它是一个长期积累的过程。长期积累的事实上就使得我们学生多样化的需求呢难以真正的获得，是吧？难以真正获得，所以它这个政策呢瞄准的目标呢就是说满足学生多样化的需求。前面很多人讲了这个全人教育，我认为全人教育呢，从历史上来说，一个是从社会整体发展来说，是让个体能满足整个社会的发展；另外一个呢，从个体这个角度来说，就是让个体的各种能力、各种天性得到充分发展。那么我们这个双减意见提出的这个满足学生多样化需求呢，事实上是朝着这个方向的努力，是吧？现在那么具体的又有哪些举措呢？一个是减少作业，第二个是减少这个校外培训，是吧？双减主要是减这两个方面。那这两个方面呢，要减少，并同时呢，它需要提升学校的服务水平，因为这两个是一连的，是一个体系。那么为什么培训那么多？就是因为家长对学校的教育不满意，对学校教育的不均衡感到不满意，希望自己孩子能够在单一按照分数这个标准排队的情况下，能够站得更前，这是关键的。所以从这个角度来说呢，我们这个双减的举措当中啊，它强调学校的质量提升，学校的效能提升，与我们这个整体的，就是减轻这个课业负担呢，是整个一个体系的两个方面嘛。这里面的最关键的呢，我认为还是要一个治理的问题。对学校怎么去治理？我们采取单一的标准，或者是用行政指令来治理，还是用专业的标准来这个多样化的确保学校有高度的自主权，教师确保他的教学自主权，学生确保他学习自主权来实施，是吧？这里面呢，我觉得是有些深层次的问题。那么，如果从形而上的层面来说，双减要是真正实现的，是一个做人的价值理念的问题。因为中国的几千年呢，形成特别是儒家宣传的就是吃得苦中苦，方为人上人。做人上人的这个理念呢，实际上渗透到中国社会的各个方面。曾经有一些这个打工子弟的父母啊，希望自己孩子能够在城市上学上访。上访的过程当中，我就告诉他们，我叫你们呢，要从自己孩子的利益考虑，成长法律考虑。他们都讲，我告诉孩子，吃得苦中苦，方为人上人。所以这种理念呢，是渗透了中国社会的深层次，甚至长期的积累难以改变的。那么这种想当人上人的这种观念呢，就成为一个强大的动力，支配了所有的家长、所有的学生，甚至我们一些教育的管理机构、学校。所以要解除这个从这个价值取向选择的人生价值取向选择的这样一个动力，我觉得是非常重要的。要把这个做人中人，建立人人平等的社会作为一个长远的方向，才有可能创造一个条件，让我们这个真正双减能减下来，真正的全人教育呢能够开展下去。那么要实现这样的目标呢，最关键的就对中国来讲，我下面的列举的是几个具体的问题，怎么去培养全人，怎么样？最关键的第一个呢，就是要遵循基本的规律，遵循教育的常规。而教育的常规里面呢，学生一定是学习的主人，才能够是有条件培养全人。如果学生没有成为学习的主人呢，就不可能成为全人。 而在正常的教学当中，人的各种需求都应该平衡的得到满足。他要吃好，要玩好。而我们现在很多学校呢，下课以后是不能够让学生进操场的，这就是成问题了，对吧？那么，我们上学的时候啊，曾经，特别是遇到考试的时候，要比拼，跟同学们比拼谁玩的更多，玩的更好，是吧？但是现在孩子都没有这个条件了，一定让教学师呢有教学的自主权，然后学校也应该有教学的自主权，同时呢，要有社团活动来保障学生多种活动的需求。事实上，多种活动需求不能够仅仅由单一由教师来满足，也不能够仅仅由学校自先的设置。学生可以通过自主的活动来，特别是一些团队的活动，来满足自身的成长发展需求。那么，所有学生呢，都应该获得成长，这个才能够让这个全人的目标得以实现。第二个方面呢，我觉得对于学校来说，要转变自己的定位，因为我们这个很多学校事实上是教校，以教为主，以教为主呢，它学校的包括规则的制定，包括规章制度各方面都是以教作为它的一个中心的，是吧？学校要成为学生学习服务的这个中心，成为学生学习服务，要服务学生成长。这个呢，就在整个学校的管理体系设置方面呢，就应该完全要有一个新的改变，是吧？比方讲，对学生的学习进行诊断，要进行有针对性的服务，对学生的志向进行培养，是吧？进行包括他的职业生涯，要把整个的学生成长发展的一个整体，当成学校工作的方向和目标，而不仅仅是关注学生的考试分数，这个才是很关键的。那么在这同时呢，要在学校的这个内容方法，以及各方面呢，包括考核的评价的标准，这方面呢都要做改变，才能够更好的这个实现这样一个目标。那么另外一个呢，就是对于我们质量的内涵要重新改变，因为我们现有很多学校的质量的内涵呢，都是只看考试分数。事实上呢，要不管是双减还是我们培养全人，都应该对这个质量观呢进行更新。这个质量观太狭窄、太狭隘。事实上，我认为义务教育阶段呢，一定这是我讲了很多年的一个观点，就是义务教育阶段的课程安排最多只能占学生的时间的60%，那么其他40%时间应该由学生自主安排，把他的时间、空间以及学习内容或者是活动的主题，由学生自己去选，学生自己安排，是吧？这样呢，才能够让学生的多样性得到成长发展。现在我们很多学校呢，就是在这个方面呢做的不足，把所有的时间都用来在那个国家规定的课程标准那个内容上，那么用来干啥呢？用来比拼分数，为了1分可以把40%的时间给都填进去，这个才是问题，是吧？而且质量本身呢，应该是动态的，不是静态的。质量本身呢，是一个相对的，又不可能有绝对的。不同个体它的教育质量应该有一部分是相同的、可比的，有一部分是不相同的、是不可比的。这个才是我们质量的整个的内涵。那么，作为学校内部呢，要完善这个教育责任链。现在我们最大的问题呢，是一个学生进到学校以后，他的教育责任应该谁负？这个问题不清楚。我们现在相对都是专业机构啊，医院呢应该是更明确一点。医院进去以后，这个病人，那么就诊以后，谁来负责他？那么肯定是接诊这个大夫。但是呢，我们现在学校呢，这个关系不明确。学校的一些机构设置啊，使得我们学校教育的责权分离了。责权分离以后呢，那么就谁来负责很难办。比方讲， 我前不久到一个学校去，这个学校呢，他就说他们学校撤销了德育处，撤销德育处以后呢，他的学校德育工作做得更好。为什么？因为原来德育处呢认为他管德育工作，那么教师就不管了，是吧？教师就不管的问题就很多。这样一来的话呢，他把撤销以后呢，这个每个教师你要担起这个责任，你这个德育的工作的责任要把它担当起来。这些的责任链的问题呢，实际上又跟外部的整个的管理体系是直接相关的哈。那再就是讲到这个延时服务，延时服务是我们这次双减意见当中一个很关键的内容。但是延时服务不是一个简单的时间延长，它涉及到内容的要增加，你不能老是教还是原来那些内容。这个延时服务呢，最关键的它涉及到这样几个方面：内容、安全责任。安全责任不是简单的跟时间成正比的，而是超过某一个极限，这个安全责任就大大的加大了，是吧？安全的风险就大大加大。那么再还有一个就是我们师资，我们现在就是整体的师资编制是按照原来的这个要求设定的，但是延时服务以后，师资编制没有改变，这个我们意见当中要讲增加，但是落实到增加又涉及到经费，要落实到经费呢，最近我就了解到各个地方呢已经出现教师发不出工资出来，那么这种情况我们又有难度，是吧？那么再还有一个师生的劳动这个疲劳程度，在学校如果过度疲劳，它效能比较降低，效能降低就引发整体的效应，包括还有一个心理的问题，心理问题发生的比例呢大大增加。最近呢，北京市专门对这个学校心理咨询的建设的发了文，要求很高。但是按照那个要求呢，就我了解的情况，就北京市的学校呢，能够达标的依然是很少的数量。所以从深层次，我们就要想，在这个减负的时候，是不是要把那个就是说简单的把时间延长，是吧？再还有一个就是涉及到效能，那么这些呢，我觉得应该依据学校的实际情况来解决。实际情况，因为时间关系，我尽快再把它讲完哈。那么再就是个转变家长的观念。前面我们讲这个做人上人这个观念，不只是学校里哈，实际上整个社会都有存在。现在转变家长的观念，最关键的是，让家长有整体的教育观，是吧？有长远的教育观。如果从全人来说，可能跟整体教育观相关；如果从时间上来说，它是有一个长远的教育观。那么中国古代啊，这个皇帝教太子，他并不在意这个孩子短期内能够学的知识怎么样，而是在乎当这个孩子长江山了以后，不要把江山丢掉。现在呢，当然我们培养的不是皇帝，但是这个整体的教育观跟我们前面讲的全人教育观哈有相互交叉的关系。那么我曾经就反复的强调，一个学校培养学生呢，不能够仅仅看当下的考试成绩，还要看他60岁的时候是不是进监狱了，这个才是更关键的，是吧？作为这个整体教育观，所以从这个角度来说呢，我们这个教育的内容啊，就应该对整个社会内容呢，应该是多方面的包容的，就包括对这个科技啊、对文化啊、对自然呢、各方面都应该有相应的空间。那么再一个呢，就是要处理好我们健康和学业的关系。现在我们单方面追求分数，然后身心健康出了问题，身心健康出了问题以后呢，事实上它跟学业有相关的哈。一般的大比例的这个调查统计都显示，过度肥胖的学生，他的学业呢必然的下降，是吧？事实上呢，如果我们对学生的活动过度限制，它必然造成他的身心受到影响，这个肥胖发生率必然是增高。我们近视的问题呢更严重，近视中国成了世界第1大近视国了。我们学生呢，就是高中生的这个近视率达到81.几%， 也就是说，我们现在要这个选这个航空飞行员呢，已经是没有足够的空间了，可能是找不到这个视力这个合格的人，对吧？这个问题很严重。那么再一个呢，就是我们一定要重视这个志向。现在呢，由于大量的做题，就出现一个现象，这个词是我造的一个词哈，叫题海默志。这个人的志向生成最关键的时间，最重要的时间就14、15岁。所以孔子讲“吾十有五志于学，30而立，40不惑”。那么这个是一个基本的年龄特征的特点哈。但是呢，我们现在大量的学生因为一天到晚做题，他没办法生成志向。因为生成志向的关键点呢，第一个就是他了解自己。怎么了解自己？通过充足的活动，自主活动了解自己，这是最关键的。充足的自主活动才能知道自己优势潜能在哪方向，兴趣在哪方向，然后另外一个呢，就是要了解社会的需求。如果你没有足够的社会活动，你根本上就不可能了解社会的需求。由于这两个条件没有达到，所以我们绝大多数的中学生都没有在14、15岁生成自己的志向，这样就导致我们这个问题呢，叫出现这个现象叫题海默志。所以要消除这种现象，才能够实现全人的发展，这是最关键的。那么要解决被动性人格的问题，我们现在大量的学生由于时间、空间和自己的活动内容都是被别人安排了，所以呢，形成被动性人格。这个被动性人格的比例呢，在中国的学生当中越来越高，就导致了很多孩子就是父母叫他干什么事，老师叫他干什么事，很快干了，但是呢，没有别人叫他干什么时候，他不知道干什么了。就到大学的时候，没办法生成人生目标，然后也不知道怎么自主的学习，自主学习能力下降。这样一来的话呢，就导致了这类学生他就是走出学校门以后的成长发展呢，出现严重的障碍，是吧？那么再还有一个呢，就是我认为学习责任和权利意识，这是当下我们存在的一个比较普遍的现象。很多孩子呢，没有权利意识，也没有责任意识，是吧？两个方面都不到。但是我们现在教育当中，特别是学校教育当中或家庭教育当中，都没有重视这个问题，认为这个给孩子讲什么责任和权利呢？让他好好学习，就是这背后深层次实际上是一个工具性和目的性的问题，是吧？怎么摆好这样一个关系？那么只是希望小孩子成为一个工具，不希望小孩子有他的自己的目的性生成，让他不希望孩子的主体性生成。所以这是当下的解决的另外一个需要解决的另外一个问题。我就简单的把我的想法向大家做个汇报，谢谢各位。
谢谢楚老师的这个精彩的讲演。我觉得给我们上了一堂非常生动的政策分析课和教育哲学课。您点的这个教效非常有警醒作用，我个人感觉。所以我觉得希望今天的听众有幸能够完整聆听您的演讲哈，能够从您对于当前教育问题的分析，以及对全人教育理念相一致的这种整体的教育观、长远的教育观。就像您讲的，古代我们希望太子掌握江山，现代我们希望自己的孩子能够掌握自己的人生。所以这样的一种常规教育的形态和思路的分析，使大家能够对国家近期的教育政策以及背后的指导思想有了一个更深刻的理解吧，希望是这样。同时呢，您对进入双减时代以后教育事业推进的大方向，还有英语重视的领域的一些阐释，我相信也给了我们今天在线的很多一线工作者有很多的启发。现在呢，我再把那个保存教授刘教授，我再把您请回来。感谢您还陪我们待了这么久，也很辛苦啊。陈老师已经11点半了，纽约的同学们已经深夜了哈。不好意思，这个时间还是没有掌握好。我们现在呢，我综合了一下大家的问题，不可能每个都达到了，只能整合一下。我们先从刘教授开始，还有楚教授一人一个问题，每个人5分钟。刘教授刚才讲的时候呢，提到了全人教育的理念是针对教育的这个工具化、碎片化、机械化的一个倾向，相对而生的。那您也讲到，像培养目标、课程设置、教学方式、师生关系这一系列的层级里面，都渗透着对全人教育的一个需求，而他们中的任何一环的缺失呢， 都没有办法实现所谓真正的全人教育。但是在日常的教育工作当中呢，我们这些教师啊、校长面对升学的压力、业绩考评，还有来自家长、社会的压力，他们就是我这是总结几个人的问题哈，就国内外的同行应该都是一样的。那么您作为国际教育研究的学者，有没有什么好的建议？他们怎么能够在这样的压力的裹挟当中，能够更好的平衡，保持这种对全人教育理念的坚持？因为坚持总是说起来容易，做起来难。就想听听您有没有什么好的建议？5分钟时间，谢谢。
谢谢你啊，刚才我看那个群里边那个 Lazy 说了个问题，全人教育这个愿景啊，它的确是一种愿景，就像我们讲全面发展是一种愿景，是一种理想。那我想我们作为研究者也好，作为老师、作为校长也好，那我们首先要有这种美好的一种愿景、一种理想啊，因为我们培养人，那么我们作为一个人存在这种社会当中，我们不是作为一个挣钱的工具，是吧？不是作为一个政治的工具、投票的工具，是吧？那么我们也不是仅仅作为一个员工，那么我们作为一个在家庭里面我们承担不同的角色，在社会当中，在单位当中我们承担不同的角色。那么特别是我们每个人要活得幸福，对吧？然后我们每个人要怎么讲呢？就是活得有尊严、有价值，啊，能够悦纳自己，啊。那么在这种情况之下，当我们培养人的时候，那么我们想，我们每一个教育工作者，我们应该有一种理想。那么这种理想就是首先要培养人，然后才是培养承担各种角色的人，啊。我觉得这两个就是说从理论上来讲不矛盾，啊，但是在这个实践当中，它的确就像你刚才讲的那样子，我们面临着各种压力。升学的压力，这种压力来自于学校，来自于社会，来自于家长。那么就像我们国家前些年我们倡导素质教育啊，我们批判应试教育，实际上实就是讲我反对把这种素质教育和应试教育给完全对立起来，而且纯粹的应试教育是不存在的啊。你讲的应试倾向是可以的，应试教育是不存在的。但是如果一个学校面临着社会上压力的时候，面对家长压力的时候，如果一个学校的一个老师，你不能够让他的孩子能够考上好的学校，对吧？不能够取得好的考试的成绩，那么不管这种考试啊，它是不是合理，但是它是制度化的，那么我们都应该为孩子提供他通过考试并且取得好成绩的一种条件啊。那么只有这样，那你才是个好学校，你才是好校长，你才是好老师。那否则你这个工作可能就做不下去，啊，那么我们也要考虑到这样一些因素。但是当我们考虑到因素的时候，就像刚才我讲，那么全人教育理念是一种理想，是一种梦想，它和我们的现实，它和我们主流的这个不一定是政府的，可以是社会上的家长的一个主流的这个价值观，或者是世界观或者共识啊，或者我们用他们的一些价值一些追求啊。它不太一致，当不太一致的时候，那么我们作为一个社会当中的校长，一个社会当中的老师，那我们也应该考虑到这种诉求，啊，来满足这种现在这种评价制度当中的这种需求。但是在我们育人的时候，我们一定要想着，那么我们在满足这些硬条件的同时，我们怎么样来促进学生的全面发展，促进学生的全面发展，啊？那我们作为在学校里边，我们设一些校本的课程，对吧？我们通过开展一些活动，我们在教育的内容和方法上，在途径上，我们做一些改变，那么可以就是怎么讲呢？在一定范围之内，来促进学生的全面发展。虽然我认为在短期之内我们不可能实现我们心目当中那种目标，但是我们希望朝着目标慢慢的一点点的有所改进，来接近我们的理想，这就我想说的哈，谢谢大家。
谢谢您，谢谢您。我希望这个在群里面 大家一直在热情提问的观众朋友能够从刘教授的演讲中也找到自己的答案，因为这是一种可能是一种理念上的坚持和一种认可。我们时间关系呢，我们必须要迅速的切换到下一个问题，是对楚老师的众多问题当中，我总结了一下，我们来看看这个对于社会资本的参与，因为刚才我们更多的是关注了教师、学校学校的管理者。那我们可以这样说，就对于您提及的众多优先关注和优化的领域，那很多公立学校呢要推进其中任何一项，其实都面临着很多根深蒂固的升学需求啦，为学习而学习、为成绩而学习的这种固有的认知，然后再加上校内资源不足的压力和局限，因此呢要全面提高校内的管理教学水平，同时还要面临促进学生全面发展带来的新的教育需求，还有家庭教育的需求等等等。那这些需求是不是为社会力量的参与教育提出了新的需求，或者一直以来就存在的需求？那么社会教育资源能够为全人教育的发展提供怎么样有效的支持呢？就您看来，是不是可以给一些建议和方向？
好，谢谢。
5分钟时间，楚老师。
这个问题比较大哈，我只能简要的就是说几个要点。第一个，我们很多人认为这个资本呢是一个很坏的东西，我们包括这个校外培训各方面都是因为资本来造成的，所以这个观念呢我是不太赞同的。资本本身是中性的，它看你这个社会设置了一个什么样的体制和机制，如果这个体制和机制设置适当的话，这个资本能够发挥积极的效应。实际上学校本身它不能产业化，但是学校教育本身是产业的，对吧？有产业特性，所以从这个角度来说呢，我们不能够简单认为这个资本导致了我们这个教育走偏了，而是说我们没有设置一个恰当的机制，就使得这个资本呢，造成的它产生的坏的作用可能大于它的好的作用，这是第一个。第二个呢，我们这个教育，任何一所学校，它都是一个有限的责任主体，因为它的资源、它的人力和各方面都是有限的，它能承担的责任都是有限的，不能够因为我们讲双减，我们相关的部门就对学校呢，就把它当成个万金油，认为它什么问题都能解决，事实上那个做不到，是吧？所以这一点呢，大家一定要清晰。我们在双减过程中，所以刚刚我讲的时候也强调，一定要保障学校有它的自主性，有它的自主性以后，它才能提高效能，然后才能够实现双减。如果学校没有自主性，教师没有自主性，学生没有自主性，它只能够效能下降，更不能够双减。它所起的作用是各方面的负担更重，是吧？所以从这个角度来说呢，我们不能把学校变成无限的，正是因为不能把学校变成无限的，讲的第三方面，我们要真正的减负，一定要把社会的有各种教育资源都把它能够整合到一起，让各个方面，因为自古以来我们社会跟学校就没有明确的边界。陶行知有一句经典的话，就是不能充分利用学校资源的，不能充分利用社会资源的学校是无能的学校，不能够为社会服务的学校是没有尽到责任，是吧？那么这两个方面是直接相关的，所以现在我们真正的要双减的，它一定是一个社会系统工程，包括我们延时服务，包括其他一些学生的多样性活动、多样性需求的满足，都需要利用社会的资源才能够实现目标。我就讲这3点。
非常谢谢您，特别感谢。所以在这个双减引发的系统工程当中，所以我们任何的一个参与者，尤其是我们的家长不应该把这个焦虑转化到学校身上，而学校的管理者也应该从楚老师刚才开出的这几剂药方当中得到自己的定心丸拿到自己的自主权，自主的去提高自己的效能，我觉得特别有帮助。时间非常的有限制，我就不再赘述了，我就把话筒交给陈鹤南教授，让他来给我们做今天的结束陈词。谢谢陈老师。
谢谢肖主任。哇，今天国际国内各位嘉宾们的精彩发言让人获益匪浅，我感觉我今天收获这么大，今天晚上可能要睡不着觉了。大家的宝贵分享为我们不断探索全人教育的新途径提供了非常及时珍贵的指引。再次感谢海内外专家学者和校长们的无私分享， 接下来，我们各大中国教育研究中心将联合国际全人教育专家，以及我们各大全球中心开展一系列的研究和培训活动，包括全人教育的系列大师课。那么我们致力于培养儿童身心灵健康均衡的发展，成为完整的人。最后期待今后与各位专家、校长、老师、家长、同学们的深入交流。再次感谢各位嘉宾，以及我们今天我的2位优秀的搭档，我们各大全球中心的肖主任，以及我们这个美丽的 Kelly 主持人。所以非常感谢，再次感谢大家，期待我们今后更多的合作。
也感谢您，谢谢大家，
再
谢谢我们
祝大家
在纽约的各位同学们，谢谢大家。
谢谢。